Cause and effect. The writers only had 2 hours to write an episode and had to work with the only scenes that were completed.
The Enterprise has sustained damage and everyone is panicking.
Picard calls for all hands to abandon ship, and the whole thing explodes. Cause and effect. Overall,
This episode was surprisingly short, but everyone died, which pulled it up a lot for me. I gave it an A-. And somehow we cut back to everybody being alive after the opening credits.
they're checking out their previously unexplored Typhon Expanse, and we cut to a poker game where Riker wonders if Data is cheating. They're probably all still wary of Geordi cheating earlier in Ethics when he was looking through the cards like a little bitch. But the focus is on the game itself, not the conversation around it, which was unique.
Beverly and Riker are trying to outraise each other. Oh, I have comments about how hot Beverly looks. I don't know if I want to put those in there.
Well, that's going in.
And Beverly calls Riker's bluff.
Must be pretty easy to throw out ships like that when they don't actually use currency in the future.
Beverly gets called to sickbay to check on LaForge, who is complaining of dizziness and headaches.
And while Beverly says he has all the symptoms of an inner ear infection, there's no physical indications.
And while she's in the middle of injecting him with something, she experiences deja vu.
So hopefully she hasn't actually already injected him with something.
Later, as she lies down to go to bed, she seems to hear indistinct voices.
The next day, Geordi says because the Typhon Expanse is huge, it'll take a long time to chart, and Beverly brings up the voices she heard, and Picard's reaction was great.
I heard voices in my room last night. I was alone, so at first I thought I was imagining things.
And to make herself sound less crazy, she lies and says that 10 other people also reported hearing voices.
Data says there were no anomalous readings, and Troy didn't sense anything either.
Which is not unusual for her.
And at no point does Beverly bring up that the same kind of stuff was happening during Remember Me, so maybe she's just going crazy for real this time.
Or the way Troy kept hearing music that no one else could hear in The Survivors. They get called to the bridge when Worf picks up a distortion of the space-time continuum.
And they get too close, and the ship shuts down.
Which always makes me wonder how the backup systems work. When it's not a problem with the ship, it's something from outside that's affecting them. If it's pulling power out, I don't know how it's doing that, but how do the backup systems stay on?
Good question. Another vessel emerges from the distortion on a collision course.
And Picard just sits there and doesn't say anything. What a great captain.
Riker says they should decompress the shuttle bay to push them out of the way, and Data says they should use a tractor beam to push the other ship out of the way.
They try the tractor beam, but the ship still hits one of their engines.
And then we get the same clips from the opening, where the ship explodes. We then cut back to the opening poker game, where Riker wonders if Data is cheating. They're probably all still wary of Geordi cheating earlier in Ethics when he was looking through the cards like a little bitch.
This time Beverly seems to sense that something is wrong, and Riker folds because he had a feeling that she was going to call his bluff.
She gets called to sickbay again for Geordi's dizziness, and this time they both feel that they've had this discussion before.
And I thought it was weird that they went with different camera angles the second time around. I would have thought they would just go with the same ones.
I was looking at the background of this one, and they did that intentionally.
Yeah, I did read about that. I thought their reasoning was nonsensical, that people might think it was a clip show. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I would have thought using the same camera angles would accentuate the things that were different each time. I would have thought it would be cool if they used just a different take every time.
Later, when Beverly's getting ready for bed, she hears the voices again, but this time calls Picard right away to talk about it. He first tries to drug her to get her to go away.
My Aunt Adele cured a lot of sleepless nights with this steamed milk.
And he also says he is experiencing deja vu.
While simultaneously humble bragging about how much he reads.
But I assumed that I'd read the book years ago and I'd forgotten.
And he tells Dr. Crusher to have Data and Geordi run a diagnostic on the ship, instead of him telling them to do it himself.
It was his way of saying, go away. The next day, they have a meeting, and the scan did not turn anything up.
The space-time distortion appears again, and this time I noticed Ro's new haircut, which is a step down from the old one.
Glad you're staying focused on the things that matter.
And the other ship appears, and even with the advantage of having gone through this before, they all die again.
We then cut back to the opening poker game, where Riker wonders if Data is cheating. They're probably all still wary of Geordi cheating earlier in Ethics when he was looking through the cards like a little bitch. But their sense of deja vu comes up earlier, and they're even able to call the cards before they're dealt.
And I started to experience deja vu to when I watched Evil Dead.
8 of spades. 2 spades. Jack of diamonds. Jack of clubs.
In sickbay with Geordi, Beverly calls Picard, who also complains of deja vu.
She says that she ran an optical scan and found that Geordi's visor was doing some Star Trek sciencey stuff with distortions.
I don't even want to talk about that. Geordi says he'll check out the warp core to see if that would somehow explain things, and Picard tells him to scan for subspace issues. In her quarters, Beverly tries to pass the time until her next death by reading a book, but decides that's too hard and gives up immediately.
She hears the voices again, but is ready to record them, and contacts Geordi, who says he picked up some stuff as well.
Data analyzes the recording and says there are 1,000 voices overlapping belonging to the Enterprise crew.
Geordi says they're trapped in a temporal causality loop, repeating the same events over and over, and could have potentially been trapped for years without knowing it.
Data has them listen to isolated parts of the recording that mention the time-space distortion and the collision with the other ship, and they suggest that avoiding the crash may allow them to escape.
But Picard says they'll stay on the same course and just try to avoid the collision.
Picard says they won't change course until there's a reason to change it, but if they know they're going to crash, it would still make more sense to change course. If they're going to crash anyway, then they're going to crash anyway, but changing course at least suggests that they may change things.
Geordi says by staying on the same course, it might be too late by the time they know what's going to happen, and they should try to send a deliberate message to the next loop.
Which Data will later pick up subconsciously somehow.
And Geordi somehow knows how to set all of that up and how it's all going to work.
Then the whole scene with the space-time distortion happens again, and right before the ship explodes, Data types a message on the thingamajig on his arm.
I called it an iPod. We cut back to the opening poker game, where Riker wonders if Data is cheating. They're probably all still wary of Geordi cheating earlier in ethics when he was looking through the cards like a little bitch. But when Data deals this time, it's all threes, and then all three of a kind, which shows how easy it would be for him to just cheat all the time.
Beverly examines Geordi in sickbay,
and she runs the same scan and finds the same thing as before, and she tells Picard again.
And later in his ready room, Picard realizes he's not actually sure how books work. Down in engineering, Data keeps encountering the number 3 on the panels. Then Beverly mentions the voices and they all go to their meeting.
In the meeting, that opens with a cool camera shot, Geordi explains everything again, and he and Data mention that they've seen the number 3 everywhere.
You think we sent ourselves a message?
Would make sense. Maybe we are trying to tell ourselves something.
Geordi says a large explosion might have ruptured the space-time continuum, which was the same explanation they had for yesterday's Enterprise, and it still doesn't make sense.
But before they can investigate further, they run into the distortion.
And right before the ship hits them, Data notices the 3 pips on Riker's collar.
And he decides to go with Riker's plan of decompressing the shuttle bay to push them out of the way, which works. Then he and Geordi lay out the entire episode for all the people who somehow did not get what was happening.
They say Data may have inadvertently been causing all the occurrences of the number 3. How is he making the 3s appear on the panels? Is that how those panels work? That you can somehow just program them to show up a bunch of 3s everywhere?
And Worf determines they've been in the loop for over 17 days.
Is the time loop somehow restricted to one location? If they're going back in time, they're repeating the same time. It's not just that the same events are happening over and over again. The other vessel hails them, and it turns out to be a Federation ship outdated by 80 years, captained by Fraser. And he stupidly doesn't notice anything strange about Picard and the others wearing different uniforms, nor does he seem even mildly concerned about how they just almost crashed, or about the time distortion, which they also detected. And Picard tells him to beam over because he needs to explain how big of an idiot he is.
Cause and effect. Overall,
the time loop idea seemed like a perfect fit for Star Trek, and the episode repeated stuff without it becoming boring or tedious, which for this show was somewhat surprising. But the explanations for what was happening, the cause of it, and how they got out of it were all nonsense. It's hard to care about what's happening when the solution to the problem is something that they're just completely making up. Up until near the end, I was invested in everything, but once they started talking about how they were going to have Data remember something, it started pulling me out, and once they got to the end and explained where the 3s came from, I was done caring. Then Fraser's interaction with Picard made no sense, and I just started getting irritated. The majority of the episode was interesting because I wanted to see where it was going, but it turned out to not go anywhere interesting. If the ending hadn't dropped the ball so hard and just relied on Fraser popping up, it could have been a good episode, but for me it didn't come together into anything that made sense. I gave it a C.
I give it a C+. This was more of a fun, memorable episode, but not necessarily a great one. I like the way we were thrown into the opening, and how after the opening titles, the episode started as normal, without everything being explained in the first 10 seconds. I wish there had been an explanation as to why the crew was able to be aware of the deja vu, outside of the show has to continue. And it also bothered me that Fraser's ship was completely in the dark. If they had been trapped in there for over 80 years, they never had any deja vu or suspected anything when the Enterprise could do it in 17 days. It seems like it would have been smarter to send Geordi a message instead of Data. They could only send one word to Data, but Geordi was picking up visual images of past loops. Why not rig his visor to have one of the images stand out? It would have made about as much sense as their Data plan, which I agree was nonsensical and stupid. And it was very convenient that the deja vu never addressed the actual important moment, where one of them would have said, yeah, Data's plan doesn't work. Or, yeah, we're gonna run into this distortion. Let's stop.
Well, I thought maybe the deja vu was stronger at the beginning of the loop or something.
See, now you're trying to justify this one.
Well, see, if they had made a comment about that, that could have explained it, but they didn't.
At no point did they send a transmission or a shuttle or a probe or anything to anybody else, even after they knew what was going on. What is wrong with these people? And if they're trapped in this little pocket of time, over 17 days, no one else tried to check in or contact them in any way, aren't they always going to missions and doing stuff?
Yeah, but they said it would take a long time to chart this region. I don't know why I'm defending this episode.
I understand that this is an unexplored region, so wouldn't the protocol be we should check in more often, just in case they run into the Borg 2 or something? And now we know that not only Geordi can easily cheat at poker with this X-ray vision, but Data and his fancy robot shuffling. Why do they even play? Or maybe that's how they play, where everybody constantly cheats and they have to try and counter the other person's cheating. That would be a whole game in itself. I'm just waiting for Troy to reveal she can sense how you're feeling about your hand so she knows if she should fold or not. Or Worf just holding a knife under the table. I think you should fold. So it was a fun episode, but it didn't make any sense.